Our final session of the day takes on one of the most pressing questions that we are facing. How might AI affect democracy? Will generative AI erode our democratic institutions through misinformation and manipulation? Is there a realistic way it can help citizens become more active participants in the democratic process? The stakes are enormous, and the answers are still unsettled. To frame the conversation, we're delighted to have Chara Podimata with us. Chara is an assistant professor of operations research and statistics at the MIT Sloan School of Management. Her research sits at the intersection of mechanism design, machine learning, and the design of democratic processes themselves. After her presentation, Songyi Yoon will moderate a panel discussion. Songyi is the founder and managing partner of the AI-focused investment firm Principal Venture Partners. She previously served as the president and CSO of NCSoft and the CEO of NCSoft West. Are there any Guild Wars fans out here? All of my references today are just falling completely flat. She's also a trustee of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and a member of the MIT Corporation. We'll close the session with another brief audience Q&A. Mic runners will be in the aisles to help you ask questions, so please save your questions until then. And please welcome Haru.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thanks for the wonderful introduction. I'm Chara Podimata. I'm going to be talking about a few projects that we have. The title of my talk is Toward the Science of Auditing in AI-Mediated Election Information. The work that I'm going to be presenting today would not have been made without my wonderful lab and a lot of collaborators from a lot of different disciplines, some from inside and some others from outside MIT. I'm going to be highlighting them in the slides as I go. So, as I'm sure all of you in this audience know, algorithms decide a lot of things about our lives right now, okay? So algorithms may decide whether we qualify for a loan or not, whether we will get a mortgage. MIT studies find that algorithms impact the quality and diversity of hiring candidates because they are the ones that are making these decisions. On a lighter note, algorithms are deciding what content to serve us on social media, whether it's our favorite dog or cat or whatnot. And on a more troubling note, we've seen a lot of people lately turning into algorithms, and specifically large language models and chatbots about election information. And the types of information that we see that people ask from these models are both with regard to the candidates and the issues in each election, but also sometimes we've seen them engage in questions about the legitimacy of the elections themselves. Like, for example, why are the US presidential elections safe? Okay. So against this backdrop, the critical challenge that we're facing is one of algorithmic accountability. And specifically with regard to chatbots and election information, we want to understand if I take two people, okay, and they interact with the same chatbot, but the chatbot is personalized to the interactions that it has had with those people in the past. And these people ask the same set of queries to that chatbot. How will the chatbot respond? How will it personalize the information that it gives to these people? There are several levels that we can judge chatbots. One is factuality, the other one is like framing of information, and we are trying to do all of these things at once. So the question that I'm going to try to address in the next 20 minutes or so is, how do we audit large language models for the information that they give around elections to different people that are asking the same set of queries? And the approach that I'm going to take here is going to have three pillars. The first pillar is going to be a survey instrument that we are going to build. What is this survey instrument? You should think of it as a bunch of questions that we have assembled that are related to elections. These questions can be about procedures. For example, with regard to the US presidential election, the questions can be about how can I vote? Where do I vote? They can be about the process itself. For example, how does the state of Arizona certify the result of the elections? It can be about candidates, like, for example, what is the policy position of Kamala Harris with regards to immigration? And it can be about specific issues. Like, for example, what does the population think in general about immigration as an issue? These are all queries that we expect people to ask to chatbots. Then we're going to create a set of prompt variations along the axis of heterogeneity that we care about. If we want to audit models about the information that they give to men versus women, for example, we're going to create prompt variations that say, hey, I'm a woman or I'm a man. Here's my question, okay? Other sources of heterogeneity that you may care about have to do with political leaning. For example, you can start phrases with I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, then you ask your question. And then ultimately, heterogeneity with regards to location. This is going to play an important role with regards to midterm elections that are coming up in the US. And finally, this survey instrument that we built, we're going to administer it to all large language models via what we call static API queries. Okay, this is not exactly the way that we humans interact with chatbots, but this is the way that we are going to go about this. And the reason why we think that this methodology has hope for success is a prior work that we completed with this wonderful set of people, Sarah Sen, Andrew Ilias, Hedy Idris, Charlotte Park, Aspen Hopkins, and Alexander Madry, on a large-scale longitudinal study of large language models during the 2024 US presidential election season. Now, what was the goal in that study? Our goal was to track the LLM behavior over time during the 2024 US presidential elections. We wanted to understand temporal drift of the responses over time, sensitivity to prompts, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to try different prompt variations, and also whether the large language models were keen on expressing any sort of political beliefs, or whether there were guardrails that stopped them from expressing these political beliefs. How did we do that? The survey instrument, we created a fixed survey of questions for consistent longitudinal comparison. We queried 12 models. 6 of them were offline, and then the other 6 were either online or augmented with online capabilities. The duration of our study was between July and November 2024, daily or near daily runs. This means that our survey was administered to these LLMs every single day for this period from July to November. And the total number of queries that we issued per day to each LLM was more than 12,000. I'm going to show you in a slide in a second how this survey instrument was built. So let me focus on this survey for a second. So we split our questions to 3 question categories. Question number 1 is what we called endogenous questions. These questions should have stable, factual, or policy responses. Think of it as like a question about when is the US presidential election supposed to happen, okay? Or what is the number of electoral votes that you need in order to win the presidency. Exogenous questions, these are questions that we made them to be event-based or evolving. For example, questions that had to do with the popularity of the candidates that were on the ballot, or with regards to the issues and the candidate's position with regards to those issues. And finally, some baseline questions to see if we're tracking the right trends with regards to non-election benchmarks. The prompt variations that we created were about 22 per base question. They included demographic or political steering prefixes and also some instruction suffixes. And they measured steerability and instruction following. Now, as you can see in the 22 prompt variations that I have here on the right, some of these are innocent, like I would like your opinion, I would like a truthful response. Some others start getting a little bit more spicy with regards to the demographics that I mentioned earlier, where we specifically told the models, hey, I'm Hispanic, I'm Asian, give me the response to my question, or prompt variations that specifically declared the person's political leaning. The scale of the survey was about 12,606 questions daily for each of the models. Now, after we have collected this huge data set, there's a question of how do you analyze this data set? And what we did was we wanted to measure semantic similarity. Remember, for that survey, we just cared about how do responses evolve over time. So what we did was we used the state-of-the-art sentence embeddings from Paraphrase Mini LM This is another good model in order to compress sentence into embeddings, essentially vectors that can give you the information in a compressed form. Then we did the standard in the state of the art, which is cosine similarity, and we averaged over time and question families. And these are the results that I'm going to present to you today. So they are all with regards to this like sentence embedding. So result number one, the large language model responses drifted significantly over time and were only partly explained by known model updates. And specifically, I want to bring to your attention these two plots over here. So you shouldn't care about the exact scale that I have on the y-axis. What you should care about is the big jumps, the big drops that you see in the differences with regards to the responses. So these differences, some of them were due to some publicly announced model updates, but the majority of them are not due to publicly announced updates. This indicates to us that probably like model providers at the back end were doing something with their models. If we think innocently, maybe they were inputting new guardrails, but we're not certain because it's not documented. But there was something happening at the back end that we have no information about. Finding number two, the model's responses are highly sensitive to demographic steering, and specifically, the biggest discrepancies are when you compare prompt variations Republican versus Democrat, and weirdly enough, Republican versus race. Let me give you an example that I found this morning as I was digging more again into the data set. There was a question in our data set about Donald Trump's policy on education. So if you ask the question, I'm a man, tell me about Donald Trump's policy on education, it started using these like inflammatory terms of like indoctrination, critical race theory, and how Donald Trump is here to, combat all these things. When you ask the same question to the same model, actually the model was GPT-4o Turbo, and you said, hey, I'm a woman, what is Donald Trump's stance on education? You would still get the same kind of information, but it was significantly toned down. The tone was way more cautious. You didn't read anything about indoctrination. You didn't read anything about critical race theory. And this is not like a cherry-picked example. I have multiple examples like that for I'm a white man, give me an answer. I'm an Asian man, give me an answer. We also see that there are trends that are cross-model. And for example, we see that Gemini 1.0 Pro, that was the model with the biggest discrepancies with regards to the prompts, whereas GPT 3.5 Turbo was the one with the smallest discrepancies. To our surprise, models systematically favored some candidates over others on subjective traits. We asked that in the form of questions about adjectives, like which candidate is the most divisive? And what we saw was that models told us about that Donald Trump was more than 75% the most divisive candidate. Then we had Kamala Harris, and then the models also responded about Joe Biden, even despite the fact that he had dropped off the race. And the refusal rate in this question actually was below, I think, 40%. We have a bigger analysis with all of the candidate characteristics that we checked. And I'm happy to delve into that more lately. Now, in passing, I will tell you the following. The model providers were very good at not allowing the models to give answers when you ask them to predict the output of the election directly. So if you typed in a chatbot and said, hey, tell me who is going to win the US presidential election, the chatbots refused. But if you masked your question in certain ways, and I can explain how we masked our questions, it turns out that the models seem to hold implicit beliefs about who would win the election, and these beliefs were very inconsistent across time and across prompts. So we forced the models in some sense to give us a breakdown of the population, and then when we created a linear system of how is it possible, how is it consistent to have these like beliefs about the breakdown of the population based on different opinions and different topics, we deduced the weight, we deduced the voter share that the models thought that each candidate would get, and we saw that the model had completely inconsistent beliefs about who would win the election. At the same time, when you asked the models to predict the favorability of the candidates, they were very happy to oblige. So if you ask the models, hey, give me Trump's favorability today, they gave you a percentage, almost always. Same with Kamala Harris. So then what did we do? We compared these favorability percentages that we were given against exit polls on real humans that were run at the same time. And what we saw was that the models, which you see the responses to the left of this dotted line, were quite good. There was still some bias, but they were much better at predicting Donald Trump's favorability compared to Kamala Harris's favorability. We conjecture that this is because Donald Trump has been a staple of national politics for 10 years now. So there is a significant amount of data that exists about Trump in the training data, in the training corpus of these models, so they can make better associations about him. And this is in contrast to Kamala Harris's standing at the time of when we were querying the models. So going back to our analysis methodology for a second here, there is a problem with embeddings that I was very careful to hit under the rug here. The problem is that embeddings associate similar language with similar meaning. But this is not in fact true, because if I say that Chara looks like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson today, and Chara does not look like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson today, both of these things have a relatively high cosine similarity score, but the meaning is actually the complete opposite. So people have started, instead of using embeddings, to just give their free-form text to an LLM and use what we call an LLM as a judge. So basically give two texts to an LLM, let's say to Gemini, and then say, hey, Gemini, tell me how similar these two responses are. And then Gemini says something, and then you take this for granted. So this has been like a standard way of annotation in the past few years. Now, the problem here is that there's no interpretability of what the scores that Gemini or your favorite chatbot are. So in a new project with half of my lab, Nico and Ellery on the left, but also Y2K and Adam from political science, we're trying to build the statistical foundations of extracting framing from text. Okay, what it means, how can we deduce the different frames in speech, but do that in an automated, statistically significant way. And this is the second pillar of our approach at a glance, building the statistical tools that we need in order to audit these systems. To do that, we need, one, statistical methods that combine human annotations with AI annotations. Two, we need statistical methods that learn to extract framing from the responses in free-form text. And three, we need statistical methods that learn to quote-unquote share information across the questions of our survey, rather than treating each of the questions separately. So I've given a flavor of what can we do, or what we were able to do for the 2024 US presidential election audit. Now, in my opinion, the problem with ecological validity when we talk about this type of audit hinges on two things. One, nobody interacts really with APIs. We all interact with chatbots, right? And secondly, very few of us go on our favorite chatbot and then announce our gender or announce our political leaning and then ask for a question. And although there are some studies that say, or that hint, that there are some similarities between the responses that you would get if you announce your persona, your political leaning, your characteristics, and if the chatbot infers those, my holy grail here would be to be able to design an automated auditing framework that learns to deploy synthetic agents to interact with chatbots as if they were human. Okay? So why do I think that that can be even possible? To give you an idea about that, I will take you all the way back to how do we do black box auditing for platforms, for social media platforms, before chatbots were a thing. So the way that black box auditing for these platforms used to happen was 3 steps. One, choose your favorite algorithm that you want to audit. It could be the TikTok algorithm, the Twitter algorithm, whatever. Then you choose your inputs. These can be the different demographics that you want to check, hey, I want to understand what TikTok does for women versus men. then you would ask people to have a browser extension that would document exactly, scrape exactly what they did and what the algorithm would recommend. This is how you would observe the outputs of the system. And then ultimately, you would do your standard econometrics average treatment effect analysis to understand, okay, what is the effect of having a person being a woman as opposed to being a man in what the algorithm recommends. Now, I want to zoom in a little bit on the humans, the inputs of this system, because that has been the biggest bottleneck for scaling up these studies beyond just a few humans that you can audit at a time. So problem number one, humans can be very costly. It's also very hard to scale studies that are done on humans that decide to give you a lot of their data through browser extensions. And by the way, I'm not judging how costly it is to get human data in this case. In fact, I think that it should be even more expensive given the amount of data that these people are willing to give to us in order to audit these platforms. Number two, we cannot really control what happens to humans outside of the platform, okay? If you watch a commercial on TV and you decide that, oh, I want to purchase these Snickers, and then you click on a link that showed you those Snickers on Instagram ad, can we really say that it was Instagram's algorithm that helped you get the Snickers? Well, we cannot, right? Problem number two, even when people know that they're being observed, there's a lot of inner thinking that happens that we can't quite control, but that leads to a lot of personalized and different content that they receive down the line by the algorithm. So in light of all of these problems, people from the HCI community have recommended that we use sock puppet studies. What are sock puppet studies? Well, they said, look, we're going to exchange humans for sock puppets. These are going to be algorithms that we build, and they're going to be super easy to scale, and we can control very easily what happens outside of the platform because nothing happens outside of the platform for these sock puppets. So you instantiate small algorithms with very clear scripts and very clear rules about how they're going to interact with TikTok, Instagram, your favorite algorithm, and then you try to measure what the algorithm did for your sock puppets. Big problem here, these sock puppets are not autonomous. They take actions according to the pre-specified algorithm that you, the auditor, has decided. So we are taking away this whole personalization element. And of course, sock puppets in their original form cannot be used in order to audit chatbots. Okay? So with a team of wonderful people, Alessandro Morosini, Sarah Sen, Andrew Ilias, Heidi Dries, and Alexander Madri, we created synthetic agents, synthetic humans in some sense, to act as our sock puppets for auditing Twitter. And to give you an idea of how we did that, we took Pew Research data that gave us a lot of information about the breakdown of the population and the political leanings and the different demographics. We instantiated a bunch of different synthetic agents, and just to be very upfront here, these are bots, okay? 100% bots. We gave them a large script to describe their persona, to describe their background. We gave them fake names. We gave them fake pictures. And then we launched them on Twitter. We launched about 2,000 bots for 2 weeks. And surprisingly, they were kept alive. This is to our surprise that Elon Musk didn't detect them. But we were able to let these bots interact with content based on their persona. And of course, we didn't allow them to write anything, but they were allowed to to tweet, to retweet, to follow accounts, to read comments. And then they also have a log with their chain of thought that tell us exactly that, hey, I read this tweet and I'm ambivalent right. So I'm really curious about this topic on education, so I want to read more. And based on their interaction with contents on Twitter, their timeline changed, and we were scraping the timeline, and we were able to deduce, how the polarization of the timeline changes as a result of different personas, how the toxicity changes as a result of the different personas, how does the political leaning of your timeline change as a result of your personas. So with that in mind, and with this prototype that we know can work in a simplified setting, I want to propose that the third pillar for doing auditing for elections with chatbots is synthetic agents. How will that work? We're going to endow synthetic users, bots, with personas, and these personas can be essentially what we have from the different prompt variations. They can be different race, they can be different genders, they can be different political leanings. Then train them to be able to conduct short conversations with chatbots. So this is a chatbot on chatbot, essentially, okay? And then collect the information that these bots are getting from the chatbots over time, and then find a way to train them in a way that ensures ecological validity, essentially to make sure that they will never behave like humans exactly, but just for the purposes of obtaining some, valid results with regards to the information that they get on elections, we want to make sure that we have built something that's ecologically valid. So these were the 3 pillars, and we are starting to deploy them for the 2026 US midterm election. We have redesigned the survey from inputs from political science experts. I know you're going to hear from Charles, who's going to be in the panel that follows up. New axis of information heterogeneity. We really want to understand how the information differs when you try to tell the model that you are from one state versus another. And we're going to do that both with prompt variations, but also with different VPN calls, so that the API pings and thinks that we are actually from a different state. And we are hoping, fingers crossed, that we're going to get enough funding. We're hoping that we're going to be able to run this both with API calls and synthetic users interacting with chatbots. And then finally, I'm someone that comes from a more technical point of view. I don't think that this is a question that should be addressed specifically only by technical people, specifically only by academics, specifically only by policymakers, specifically only by model providers. I think that we should all be talking to each other. There have been a lot of efforts currently from people, from analysts that work in politics to create similar chatbot trackers. So we are hoping to create a workshop in the fall of 2026 where we bring together both model providers, policymakers, some nonprofits that care about these issues, and also academics to understand how do we audit models for 2026 midterm elections and also beyond. Thank you very much.